morning. Welcome everyone to this Falling Walls Circle Table on Biotech Innovation in Europe and Germany. My name is Lisa Melton and I'm the news editor for Nature Biotechnology, and I'm so pleased to be moderating this important conversation with our panelists on a topic that is top of many cities and many nations' agenda, and that is, how do you bring innovation to Europe? So we'll be exploring how do you nurture that innovation, what are the opportunities for European cities with their rich heritage and vibrant culture, and what are the challenges that need to be resolved to grow a successful, vibrant biotech hub. So later in the discussion, we will pivot somewhat and apply some of that thinking to the current global crisis, and we'll take a post-pandemic look and ask whether science and innovation will be enough to get the world moving again, and what are the lessons learned so far. So without further ado, I will introduce today's circle table. Stefan Ulrich, he's a member of the Board of Management and President Pharmaceuticals of Bayer, and he'll bring to us the industry's perspective. He'll tell us more about the role that pharma can play in fostering those biotech hotspots in an innovation ecosystem. Gottfried Ludwig is a German politician, Director General Digitalization and Innovation of the German Federal Ministry of Health. He will bring us the policymakers' perspective and tell us more about why it's important to have a framework in place to ensure those biohubs can establish and thrive, but also so that the products of that innovation will be safe and reach the people they were meant to help. And Amir Nashat, he's the chairman of the Board of Directors of DuPont Therapeutics and a managing partner at Polaris. He will share his expertise as an entrepreneur and an investor. Amir's company is rooted in both Boston and Germany, and this gives him a vantage point from which to compare what it takes to translate discovery into treatment both sides of the Atlantic. So to start our discussion, I would like to ask each of the speakers to briefly state their opinion on the topic in question. Stefan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, and it's a pleasure to be here on your show. So for us to develop a hotspot in biotech is something that I think as we're all here in Berlin today in this Falling Walls setup, I think it would be a good place to use maybe Berlin as an example on how you can create a true biotech hotspot that is worthwhile being noticed. We've all seen over the past 20 or so years the emerging hotspot in biotech being Boston. And when you look at how Boston has done that, and I'm sure Amir can share some perspective on that, you see all the ingredients also in other places of the world, and I believe Berlin could be a good one for this, where you have an ecosystem where both academic players, private investors, and private sector, but also policymakers come together and sort of create this alliance of the different sectors with the interest of creating something that everyone in this ecosystem can benefit from. Again, I think Boston has shown the way how this is done. At the time, it was some academic institutions that came together, and then private sector through either VC money, but also big pharma investments came on top of that, and we see today one of the most thriving ecosystems in terms of biotech innovation.
Thank you. Gottfried, could you give us your statement, please?
Lisa, first of all, really also thank you for my part for being here of this or being part this very inspiring round to discuss the question of biotech. I think Stefan already mentioned a lot of important things comparing Berlin to Boston, and what kind of possibilities are there to create maybe a new hotspot for biotech here in Europe, and maybe especially in Germany and in Berlin, regarding all the ingredients like venture capital, but also the right people, scientists, the mindset, and everything else. And just from a regulator's point of perspective, it's just also the question not only where maybe the next hotspot could be, but how important biotech is and how important biotech even become. And I think looking at the pandemic at the moment and looking at all our discussions regarding vaccines, without mentioning any company's name, but I think also the last one in politics, reflects the importance of biotech for fostering the future of medicine, of pharmaceutical development, and for us, due to this and due to our mission to offer the best medical support, the best medical system here in Germany, I think for us it's just important to help to put all the ingredients together to create the best framework possible for biotech, also here in Europe and in Germany, and not only in Boston, although it's one of the most beautiful places I know.
Thank you for that. Abir?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and Stefan actually alluded to it. You know, when I joined the industry in Boston, which is where I first started working in 2002, Boston was actually not what Boston is today. It was viewed as maybe second, third, or fourth in the United States in terms of innovation hubs. And we had actually the university, so there was a tremendous amount of good science here and good ideas, and we would start companies. But San Francisco was at least 5 times bigger in terms of the number of companies, the amount of funding, the focus of the industry. And we were always kind of fighting up, you know, with actually San Diego was second place. Usually it was us and Maryland trying to see who would be in third place. I mean Boston. That has changed dramatically in those 18 years. And the reason is actually because of Stefan and people from his sector, which is the big pharma industry. The movement of all the big pharmas into Boston to complement our biotech companies has really changed the trajectory of Boston. So now we have not only the universities, which Berlin has, but we also have the young VC firms and young companies that get started, which are actually pretty easy to have. And I think Berlin is on the cusp of having that. And then you've got a very vibrant, big company ecosystem. And that's where, you know, obviously Bayer has done a great job of that in Berlin. And the more there are of those kinds of interplays between big companies, little companies, and academics, and the more big companies come in, the better you are. Berlin is unique in that it has such an incredible medical system there. In the context of both Germany and Europe, you've got the best universities, you've got, you know, really, really good data systems for clinical care. So you have really good substance, I think, as far as regulators are concerned. I mean, Boston and Massachusetts did try pretty hard to bring big pharma to the ecosystem. I think there were, my guess is, you know, incentives and things like that, you know, allowed big companies to relocate their research groups to Massachusetts and to Boston specifically. And Cambridge, you know, within the ecosystem of the United States politically, Cambridge is by far the most, I would say, liberal or socialist, you know, that's a bad word these days in America, but, you know, city in like America. I mean, you know, people make fun of Cambridge for, you know, being very, you know, hippie, I guess, or whatever. So, but in the end, I think Cambridge and Boston came together to appreciate the value of having this industry that is trying to help people, you know, make people's lives better, locally, you know, based. And so that's been the big difference that's made us number one, I think, now around the world for innovation. And I'd be curious what Stefan and others have to say about, you know, that question of how to bring more big pharma into Berlin, because I think that's really what changed Boston.
Thank you. Before we move into the bigger picture of companies and their interactions, I'd like to go a little bit more granular and start our conversation with talent. How do you attract talent to Berlin or any of the European cities? For instance, I'm thinking China. China made a huge effort over quite a few years to bring back what they call the sea turtles, which are people who have been trained abroad, and they offered them pretty much everything they could possibly need. They offered them their own huge salaries, they offered them facilities, they offered them networking, you name it. And this is how they built almost from nothing their biotech hotspots. Could I put this question to Gottfried first? Are there incentives that the German government are putting into place that will drill down to the individual and how to attract that talent?
I mean, the first, thank you very much for the question, which is actually very important. The question of how to attract the talent. First of all, it's from our point of view to offer the best framework, the best possibilities for working in your field in biotech. So we are very focused on the question of how can we offer you the best possible framework in the scientific world. So looking at Berlin and looking at the Charité, I think this is one of the most prestigious names in science around the world, and together with everyone here in Germany, we try just to support the whole scientific area, be it in Berlin, be it in Heidelberg or Munich or elsewhere, to offer them the best possibilities and the best framework to do their work, to do their research and development. What we really, and I think this is a really good idea also, what you really have to focus on is also how to keep talents, because we see that a lot of talents are moving then to the US or to other areas in the world where they maybe find, for example, better possibilities to not just do your research in university, but also to become an entrepreneur, so to found your own company. And I think this is one point where we really have to work on here back in Germany and Europe to offer not only the best framework for doing your research and for being a scientist, but also to offer the possibility to translate that, to translate that into products and to present or to then become an entrepreneur. And that means to give one thing is the question of the of venture capital, obviously. So the financing of ideas is one thing we try to foster, also with money being funded from the state budget, and also to offer space, so in the sense of laboratories and other infrastructures, to offer them possibilities. I think this is one thing we should focus on, but to be very honest, I think science and also the question of biotech always lives from the worldwide cooperation. So it's not our aim, to go to the US and to find every German or European scientist and to convince them to come back, but to be competitive and to motivate and to be a good possibility also to choose Germany or Berlin or another European place if you are interested in fostering biotech. So it's something in between being competitive, but not targeting the individual.
Interesting. So you brought up the venture capital as an investment to individuals. How do you see that, Amir, playing out in Germany?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great. I think talent is important. It's probably the most important. That's why I think the big companies are so important in the ecosystem, which I'll explain. Is that, as Gottfried said, Berlin, let's say, you know, with all those great universities and hospitals, already has a talent. We have that in Boston too. You know, everyone, the smartest people, you know, typically will go to the best universities if they can. The most ambitious people who want to work in medicine will go to those best hospitals. And so you already probably have all of that talent in Berlin. I can see it when I visit various laboratories, et cetera. And we had that in Boston too. The problem is as they graduate, they look for jobs, they would leave. And what changed was that, and I look at things very simply, is that, you know, you're afraid of getting a job. I mean, your wife, et cetera, you're going to move your whole family, you're going to move your husband and your kids. And you could go to like Chicago, or you could go to Indianapolis, you could go to, you know, places like that. You know, the problem is you're only going to go to those places if there's a big company there, because if you don't, you know, if you lose your job in a startup, there's no other startups in those environments, right? But if you go to San Francisco and now in Boston, you know, there's tons of little startups, but there's also big companies. So there's just so many people that are working in different jobs with the same, well, in different companies with basically the same job as you, that you can always go find another job, especially if both you and your husband or wife are in science. Both of you can find jobs. You know, it's just easier. And it really helps to have the big employers, multiple big employers in one place, because now, you know, you have people that are coming, you know, from graduate school or medicine to go work at Bayer or, you know, big company. And then they decide after 5 years to go to a startup, or people go to a startup and then after a few years they decide to go to a big company. I think it's that choice around job opportunities. To me, I've noticed that, yeah, everyone says, well, this city is too expensive and that's a big problem. The places everybody wants to go are the most expensive cities in the world. I mean, you know, New York, Boston, San Francisco, London, they're super expensive. So it's not the cost, actually. I think it's a number of job opportunities. So I think Gottfried had it right. You know, you have to create a very dynamic ecosystem.
Great. Yes. So job opportunities. So Stefan, here is where pharma plays an enormous role, right?
Yeah. So first of all, I would agree with everything that's been said. When you look at the triad, so to speak, so Europe, China, and the U.S., and when you look at where they started off from, let's not forget that the U.S. is a country that's built on immigration and attracting talent from the outside. Has always been. Now China has sent out theirs to learn, and now they're trying to get them back. Europe is somewhere in the middle, like always in real life too. And I think the same holds true for science as well. If you take Germany, for example, Germany is one of the best places for sciences and for sciences in general, and for life sciences specifically. So a lot of the innovation, even today, that's comes out of life sciences, is originated in Germany. And what we've seen over the past few decades is that when traditionally some of this innovation would go to the large German pharmaceutical companies, now it is more looking for its way to find itself to translate into new money, into startups, into biotech startups. And those were traditionally, because of availability of capital, were housed in the US, maybe also because large pharmaceutical companies like my own were not really focusing on this. I think this is changing. So to Gottfried's point, we need to see also how we can keep our talents, and the best way to keep your talents where they originated is to offer them a perspective. And perspective is employment, but it's not just employment, it's also the ability to translate their ideas into becoming something in our industry that becomes patient relevant, and that becomes a real medicine and meets patients demand. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity, having the basic science in place, to now add more capital, and adding more capital is actually not that complicated, because capital is globally mobile. So we need to create a condition under which people like our company, but also, for example, Amir and his company Polaris, is willing to take bets in Europe when they traditionally took those bets rather in the US because the US was sufficiently attractive to attract smart life science people to continue their academic work in the United States and then found companies there. I'm not ruling out that that will not continue to happen. I'm advocating for us to create conditions here, and partly this is my role, but partly this is also the role of venture capitalists to add a condition under which these startups can also flourish here. And we have the ecosystem here. I mean, we've talked about Berlin and Charité. It's not just Charité. There are other institutions here that create a unique ecosystem, plus the willingness of the people to actually sort of like grow grow this ecosystem. And when I talk about people, I talk about decision makers like policymakers at the local level. I'm talking about, so the regulator. Gottfried is a wonderful example for that. I talk about people like the head of Charité or the head of the BIH or the MDC, other Max Planck institutions. There is a willingness to work together and to create something together. When in the past, I saw much more boundaries between the different sectors, I see this blur more and more. And I think that will enable us to also keep some of our talents, and maybe even in the geopolitical situation that we're in, attract more open society now.
Fantastic. I just somehow wonder about how do you build an entrepreneurial mindset? Because traditionally, Europe has had very high standard of life sciences research, and perhaps not the same entrepreneurial zeal as you might find in the US. Do you see differences, Amir? And what do you think are challenges to build this sort of buzzing startup scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I see, obviously, I think Stefan alluded to this, the talent, quality of the research, the training, the depth and rigorousness of the individuals is there. So that's the hard part in some sense, right? I think the big difference, I would say, I've noticed when we come and recruit either ideas or people in Europe, and let's say specifically Germany, but I've noticed this across Europe versus in the United States, is I think a cultural attitude towards taking risk. I think that in the US, people are more comfortable failing. It's part of the process. It's part of the system is, you try lots of different things and people fail. And, there's certainly room for people who are risk averse. They can, there's plenty of big companies and established jobs, you can have where you try, even to today, you can be, in one company for most of your career. But there's also, if you look at like San Francisco, Boston, New York, et cetera, there's a tremendous amount of desire by certain sectors of the populace to be in multiple jobs, sometimes simultaneously, actually. And that is actually, that risk taking is really important. And I've noticed that it's becoming more and more prevalent in Boston. It used to be actually we were much more conservative than San Francisco. I haven't seen too much of a difference anymore in the last 5-7 years. And I think in Europe, people have to just be more accepting of the fact that someone may go and try 3 things and fail, but the 4th one is the one that will work, and that's actually okay. And I think that it comes down from how your parents view that, experiment with your career, to how your boss and your, thesis advisor view that experiment, to how, the society as a whole, your peers, view that. In particular, how the people that are going to hire you in your next job view that. So I think, creating a little bit of an environment or a culture or a dialogue around risk-taking with careers, and that's really what people need to do, would be nice. I mean, you have very entrepreneurial businesses and ideas in Europe, but right now they're restricted to the, very small percentage of people who become entrepreneurs, because like anything else would suffocate them in their lives. I think there's a larger group of people that would be willing to try it, if it was a little, less risky in a sense, right? And then there's a group who just really don't want to do that kind of thing, and that's great because you don't want to force everyone into entrepreneurship. So I think it's getting that level of risk tolerance in culture and in society correct. And I'm Stefan and Gottfried should talk about that because I just look at it from the outside and understand it less, deeply, because I'm an outsider to the European and German culture.
Great. Would you like to jump in and give us the German perspective, Stefan or Gottfried?
Let me give it a try. So first of all, I think what Amir has said is actually quite true when I look back into the past. But what I experience these days, as I am part of this ecosystem, is that things are changing, and that a young generation that's coming up is also changing. Maybe also because they've been globally trained now, and they are less prone to just abide by the same rules that apply to their parents and generations past. So what I see is what is required to make this work and to actually foster a more entrepreneurial mindset in this young generation of inventors, of scientists that have a great idea and that could create a company from there, is you need to create an environment in which they can actually grow. It's like with a plant, you need to have fertile soil, and then you put the plants in them and they can grow. And I think our job, and we see this more and more, and that includes all players, is to create that soil that is fertile enough so that plants can grow as well as they may grow in San Francisco, in Boston, or somewhere else. I think this is also what the Chinese government has understood. The advantage that we have is we don't necessarily need just government initiative to do this. We can do this in a much more free economy here in Europe by making the best use of our talents, but allowing them to take risk and also then allowing them to fail. What Amir noticed, which I think is very important.
Lisa, I couldn't agree more to everything said by Stefan a minute ago. I think this really changed in Germany. Thinking back like 10 or 15 years, maybe everyone wanted to be, well, I don't know, in one of the big consulting companies or in banking or something different. But this really changed dramatically in a kind of way. So I think the mindset is there or changed at least in the last 10 years. But it is about the framework, the soil where this can then flourish, right? Where this can develop in a very good way. And the important thing is to create this kind of network between the leading scientific organizations like in Berlin, the Charité, and the industry like Bayer, and also the regulator and everyone else being involved. And I think this is the crucial challenge. Maybe it's not the young generation or the generation which is now in the right, probably in the right or has the right mindset to become an entrepreneur. It's more about us as an ecosystem to create the right network and then to create the right framework for them to have the capability or the possibility to then be successful. And the question of mindset is always very it's always interesting to me, because if we are going to Boston and if we are going to San Francisco and if we are going to the big tech companies or in the life science companies, there are so many Germans I meet all the time. So I think it's probably not the mindset or the Germans or Europeans, it's more about the framework we have to create, and then everything could move in the right direction.
So Lisa,
yes.
Just to add a thought to this, because we're always talking about the young generation. I must say that what I find is that the young generation is also our generation. We're now globally trained, and there is a generation that's coming up into the decision makers' seat, and they can make these things happen. And I think this is also something that's different from what we've seen before. So that's also that fills me with optimism that we can create new hotspots besides Boston and San Francisco.
And
So,
Lisa,
so
if I can make a
what
comment,
about, yes, yes.
if I can add something, I think Stefan Gottfried have both pointed out something important about the different age, I guess ages or different, cohorts within society. At DuPont, which Stefan knows well, we have had no problem recruiting scientists, young scientists, first, career step scientists in Berlin and in Dresden. And I think part of it is because we have the support of Bayer. Part of it is because we have venture capital money, and we have professors and academics and institutional connections with Max Planck and et cetera, that give people a sense that this ecosystem exists at DuPont. And so they come to the company through different angles, but ultimately they feel very comfortable that the company has kind of a triad of support, an ecosystem that's there. And we've had no problem actually recruiting people both into Dresden and into Berlin, now increasingly into Berlin as we grow. And so I think it's 100, and actually Stefan knows this, I have members of the team that have moved from the United States to Germany, actually. Some who, actually the one person, the most senior person that did that isn't even German. And so I think that you're starting to see the beginnings of it if you can bring that ecosystem together. Now the question is, how do you make 10 more of those or 20 more of those experiments work? But I think once you have enough of them, I think then they become self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense.
So let's talk about that, about how to make it grow now, because typically a biotech sets up and they have a trajectory in which they have seed money first, then they go slightly bigger, they need more money, they raise their Series A, they go to investors like Polaris, but at a certain point, they need to go public. And this is a little bit of a crux or a problem in places I know in the UK, where somehow the markets are not as conducive as they are in the US. Could you comment on this, please?
I'd be happy to. I think that in general, this model has been solved by, I think Israeli companies initially. A lot of Chinese companies actually did this for a while too, which is you still use the U.S. capital markets, but that's changing too. I mean, in the sense that European markets are getting, more established now, and certainly the Asian markets are pretty established. I think companies, to Stefan's point, capital moves is kind of borderless in some sense, and companies are pretty smart about taking advantage of different market conditions in different places. So there's no reason why one couldn't build a company with a big presence in Europe, especially where the science and medicine is concerned, but also have business, settings in either the US or in Asia or whatnot, where you could tap public markets there and have an IPO. Israeli companies did that for years, and still do, where they have R&D in Israel, but then they have the ability to kind of build sales and marketing groups in Asia or the US, and then they go public in those environments because, the Israeli exchange is small. So I think people have been pretty creative about that, and that's a model that a lot of companies use.
So there's a way around that. So at this point, do you think perhaps it's a good idea we could take the futuristic post-pandemic look and think of how this global crisis has perhaps changed how the industry tackles issues? I mean, what is to me extraordinary is that from the point of view of a vaccine coming to market, the quickest ever that was a record was the Ebola vaccine, and that was 5 years. But now we are talking months, hopefully, instead. So I think I would really like to hear your opinions about this, whether there are some lessons learned during this, in a way, tragedy that we are going through, but perhaps there will be much we can take from it.
Yeah, maybe I get started with that. I think the pandemic, at least in our industry, has really brought out the best of who we are and what we stand for. I think within days after we saw what was about to happen in China, many people, many of our scientists, but also many of our leaders in our industry were quick on their feet to say, okay, this is going to be potentially a big problem. Let's try to find a solution. And as the problem got greater, also the degree of collaboration between first inside of our industry, but also between industry and the regulators and with academia reached unprecedented levels. Unprecedented levels in terms of quantity of collaboration, but also quality of collaboration that we've seen throughout this time. So obviously, this has led to not just very fast development of vaccines. Don't forget that we've also created a lot of knowledge around how to treat the disease, also in record time, with the clinical trials underway by all kinds of different disciplines, looking at creating evidence how to best deal with the disease. And we see it evidenced in death rates that have been falling significantly since the beginning of the pandemic, because we now know how to treat much better patients with the disease, how to deal with them in a hospital setting, but also using the different medicines that can be used out of an arsenal that we already have at our disposal. And you add to that the innovation like the antibody cocktails that are being developed and the vaccines, all of that in record time. So I think the learning from this is collaboration can lead to great results. And I think the other learning from this is you want to have a very well functioning private sector in pharmaceutical development if you want to create progress.
Great. Anyone want to jump in?
I think, oh, go ahead, Dr. Well, what I was going to say is I think, there's a lot of little companies working on this problem, but I've been really impressed by how the large pharmaceutical companies have redirected so much, especially, companies like Bayer have redirected so much of their talent to kind of solve this crisis. And I think that, it's the first time in a long time that the world is really rooting for the pharma industry and waiting, for our companies and our sector to deliver something important, that could help the whole economy. I think the link between health and the economy, people have always viewed it as a negative, like we spend so much on healthcare and it's a drag. It's actually not the right way to think about it. You can see that when you don't have good health, it's a huge drag on the economy, and that actually being in good health, whether it's because of a pandemic or whether it's because of heart disease or Alzheimer's or cancer, society is dramatically improved when people are healthy, and you can actually, the economic impact of what we do is massive. I don't think there's ever been an easy way to calculate it until, unfortunately, the last 6 months. And I think that, we're obviously a really important sector, and especially with the leadership of Stefan at Bayer and many other big companies. It's been really impressive to watch.
And it's just, yeah. No, please, Lisa, please.
So for policymakers, have things changed dramatically? Will it change going forward?
Well, they changed for sure. For everyone else, they changed dramatically in this unprecedented pandemic and crisis as we all faced it. But I think, maybe just to add one thought to everything said, which was so right already. The one thing is the level of cooperation, this kind of teamwork, this transparency as well. If you see how quick all the results were published and were shared also with your competitors, and this very close cooperation then between industry, startup, but also the regulator side showed us all how fast we can be. And I think also looking now at some methods like BioNTech and Pfizer or CureVac, also that we are reaching a level of a new kind of medical treatment or a new kind of vaccines, hopefully at least, which I think pushes everything also concerning biotech and pushes all this positive effects in a very good way, and this leads to an attention also from the policy side to all the question of healthcare, which was not there before, and also not only attention, but I think also the will or the idea that this has to be in our center of attention, not only fighting a pandemic, fighting COVID-19, but also for fighting all other diseases. Actually, we are fighting every day, and I think this changed at least the regulators' point of perspective to that topic. But there's a lot of light and hope, but there are also kind of shadows, because we also saw what did not work. So just to add that maybe in a second, I mean, just focusing on Germany now, because you always should criticize first yourself, looking how difficult it is, for example, the question of the exchange of data, so the question of interoperability, of open interfaces, of just having the right the exchange of data concerning the pandemic, showed us also that there's still a lot of work to be done to be better prepared, at least for the next pandemic. And I think this is also kind of eye-opener to everyone, how important cooperation is, right? But also how important it is to have all our systems connected and have the free flow of data, because this is always then the basis, not only in the medical world, but especially in the medical world, for better treatment, for knowing faster how good is the vaccine, how not good is the vaccine. So this is a kind of topic we think we have to tackle in the next years to come, also after in the world after the pandemic.
Thank you. And on the topic of speed, at Nature Biotech, we often tend to view biotech as dynamic and nimble, and we can make fast decisions and move ahead. And we see pharma as rather taking longer, as a sort of like this slower giant, if you like. But pharma has shown that they really can move fast. Can pharma keep this up beyond this emergency?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the entire industry, but I can tell you what I've said very often in our own company. And we're not the largest of large farmers, so I always like to tell our people, in a jungle, the smaller animal should rather be a fast animal, because otherwise you won't get very far. So I expect fast decision making from my team and from our company. And I think we've exhibited that very nicely as an industry this year. And I would think that should definitely be a learning, because sometimes when you go this fast and you actually yield very nice results, you also will afterwards, obviously, wonder if this is not something that you can do in a more permanent fashion. So I would hope that this is a positive learning for our entire sector. It definitely is for my company.
Great. So with that wonderful view of the future, I think I'd like to wrap up this excellent discussion and thank our panelists for sharing their points of view, and also thank listeners, and good morning to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.